Welcome to What Shapes Us, a podcast series by Great Lakes Institute of Management. I'm your host, Vidya Mahambare. In this series, we discuss what are the factors that truly, really affect our lives, how our lives shapes. Of course, it can be nature, it can be nurture, it can be hard work, it can be luck. But no single factor explains life's complexities. So, with the help of our guest and with the help of a framework which we call 5E framework, these E's stand for endowment, environment, education, effort, and equality of opportunity. We try to unravel the complexities of life. So, my guest today to talk about this and much more is Sirisha Bhamidipati. Welcome, Sirisha. Thank you very much for joining us. Sirisha is a founder and managing director of a firm called Align by Design along with her husband Harish. It is a strategy consulting firm which helps firm in various aspects as we'll figure out. They also have co-authored a book in 2023, Hope is Not a Strategy. So I hope to learn a lot more about the book as well in this conversation. So thank you very much, Sirisha, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Vidya, for inviting me here.
Yeah, our pleasure. So as you heard, we have these 5 E's, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about your life across these 5 E's. Will I haven't mentioned currently your education and what and all you have done until now, so we'll cover all that. But to begin with, the first E, which is endowment. So by endowment, I mean something that we are born with. That is sort of our birth lottery, right? We have no control over it. Which family we are born into, which place we are born, whether we are born with good health, good immunity or some kind of talent. Really not in our hand, but everyone starts somewhere. I understand you are born in Hyderabad or at least grew up there. So to start off with, if you could tell us about early life, now in the hindsight, early life, and how was that life and which were the endowments, if you think, which were positive and which were not, then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So I'm born in a middle class family in Hyderabad. So typical middle class South Indian family, education was the most important thing. And so academics was always very, very important in life. And also, things that come with a middle class upbringing, right? Like integrity, respect, and certain values that run in the family. So this is what I came in with, and was lucky to have parents who were, eternal optimists and extremely hardworking, and books was our biggest asset in the house. So there was no book fair that we never visited. So as children, we grew up with a lot of curiosity. I have an older brother, so me and my brother, we grew up with a lot of curiosity, learning about the world, and a lot of interesting conversations about the world that we had with parents and also grandparents. And the other very great blessing, if I look back in hindsight, is the ability, the parents seeded in us the ability to dream anything. For that matter, when I was in grade 4, I used to sign off on my books as Dr. Sirisha, FRCS
Wonderful.
London. To that extent, to that specificity. Okay, so I wanted to become a doctor, I wanted to become a neurosurgeon. So everything was like discussed, and I used to sign off. At the end of the year, right, in the books, I used to sign off as Dr. Sirisha.
Yes.
And my father used to say, one day you're going to become the prime minister of the country.
Right.
So that's what I grew up
Belief,
with, where
yeah.
it is, everything is possible. And one thing my parents always used to say was, effort is the only non-negotiable that you have in life apart from your values. Otherwise, you can do what you want.
Right. Yeah. So, that effort and the endowment of healthy, physical body is something that you lost around the age of 12 or 13.
Yeah.
And of course, no one would believe that looking at you right now. So, huge amount of effort has gone into redirecting, rebuilding your life.
Yeah.
So when that endowment massively shifted, you were a very healthy, normal, teenager, bubbling with full of confidence, hoping to become a doctor, and so on, and then something happened which the physical endowment went to nearly zero. Could you explain to us what exactly happened?
So this was way back in '94. I was 13. I had fever for a couple of days, and the usual thing, right? Like you take a paracetamol and you assume it'll be okay. And so my mother came to give me a paracetamol, and suddenly she gave me a glass of water, and the glass of water dropped from my hand. And I used to be a left-hander, so it dropped from my hand. So we were generally laughing about it, saying, I have the habit of sleeping on my left. My parents always used to tell me, don't always sleep on your left. And I was like a lean, thin, 36 kilos, like slightly underweight kind of a kid. I used to be very athletic. I used to run and all. And so they said always sleeping on one side is not good. And also my father was laughing, saying,
Yeah, something.
This is what we were telling you. Yeah. And then they took me to a hospital, nearest nursing home, because I was not able to hold anything after that. So they said it is called Saturday night's palsy. The doctor gave like a near confirmative diagnosis, where basically after being drunk on Saturday, when people drive, right, they have the tendency to put their hand on the glass of the car, right, the window of the car, and so because of that it happened. So then further teasing started, saying she's like totally drunk right now.
So it was not diagnosed.
It wasn't diagnosed properly, and then within a span of, after getting to the hospital, within a span of about 3 or 4 hours, I went to the washroom. I turned on the light switch on. I turned the switch on, and I walked in. And when I came out, I couldn't lift my right hand to turn the switch off. So that's when we realized this is something very complex. So they rushed me to in those days, the government hospitals used to be really well equipped with all types of doctors. So they took me to one of the government hospitals in Hyderabad called Gandhi Medical Hospital. And there they said, okay, something is going drastically wrong. Nobody could figure out, right? And again, this is 32 years ago. So medical science was also not so advanced, right? So nobody could figure what happened. And then they took me to the X-ray department. They said, you need to sit in a wheelchair. I said, I can walk. I don't need a wheelchair. So I went to the X-ray department, and there, just when they were about to click the X-ray, I collapsed. And that's when we realized I couldn't move my back or my legs. So nothing, no part of my body was moving. So there they picked me up and they put me on a stretcher. And as soon as this happened, my body became hypersensitive. So hypersensitivity is like, even if they touch with a feather or with a cotton wool, I used to scream in pain. So I lost complete motor ability, but my sensation became like hyperactive. So they got me there. Then they did all sorts of things. They were testing it out for a variety of diseases, but I wasn't responding for anything. And the surprising part was they sent my blood sample to 3 different places for blood tests. One came as typhoid, one came as malaria, one came as pneumonia. So so everybody was clueless about what was going on. And they were just pumping me with medicines. They did things called lumbar puncture, where they take fluid from your spinal cord to test. That didn't show anything. They did plasmapheresis, where my blood was taken out. It was purified plasma was injected into it, and it was put back into my body again.
So when did finally the diagnosis
There was no diagnosis. So 2 months I was in the ICU going through all of this.
Okay.
And end of 2 months, the doctor said, first initially the pace at which it was happening, they said they thought either my brain or my heart or lungs will go next. To that extent that they told my parents that she's not going to survive. So if you want to call anybody, you should call them right now. And after 2 months of being in that state, where only my eyes were moving, nothing else, and I was completely conscious. I could speak, I could see people, talk to people, everything. After 2 months, they said, it could be a combination of, a disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome and another disease called spinal meningitis, but the presentation of neither matched what happened to me. But they were giving me medicines, and end of 2 months, they said, see, good news and bad news. Good news, she survived.
Yeah.
We didn't expect her to survive. Bad news is she's going to remain like this forever. Because They were doing everything possible, and I wasn't responding to any kind of medication. Then they told my parents, see, you're actually spending a lot of money in the hospital. So why don't you just take her home?
Yeah.
You know, because there's nothing much that we're going to do here anyway. And whatever we're doing here, you can as well do it for her at home.
So, after
this is what
going,
happened.
yeah, so after going home, because next is environment, right? And you already spoke about your parents and how optimistic they were and never say die attitude and so on. So how did that, and how was your, like, maybe broader social environment? Uh, how did it help in coping with this?
Yeah. So when the doctor said nothing could happen, my parents took me home. And then my father was a sports person. And my parents said, okay, the doctor said nothing can be done. But we don't have to, we'll try. We'll still try what we can do. Right. So that was the most important thing for me, that, you don't give up. Till the time we can try, we'll keep trying for something. And we will figure out what can be done. And the biggest thing that I learned, and I try to practice it even today, is nobody got shaken. There was no Rona Dona in the house, or everyone being upset. They said, this is what it is.
So they accepted.
The
they
acceptance was very high. Yeah. And actually, all through while growing up also, me and my brother, everything my parents used to discuss very openly. So it used to always be an open environment where there's nothing that's hidden, or there are no two different versions of a story going on in the house or anything. Yeah. So we always felt part of that conversation, right? In hindsight, when I look back at that, that was what brought a lot of trust for me, right?
Yeah.
They're saying that, okay, it is what it is, let's figure out. The second part is saying that, let's start working on your body. And third, openly discussing with me, okay, saying, what do we do now? Right? So all of that made it a lot more confident for me. So like for the moment they took me back home, it was first about who's going to take care of me. And those were not the days when you had somebody to stay at home.
Yeah.
So it was like a very simple decision, a very honest conversation my parents had, and I still remember that day sitting near my bed, because of the steroids and everything that were pumped in, right? From 36 kilos, I became 100 kilos plus.
Oh,
okay. So I was very heavy, and every part of my body was hurting. Only my father could figure out how he could pick me, like vertically he would pick me. Only he could figure that out. And being a sports person, so the decision became very seamless. Somebody had to go back to work to take care of all the bills, and my brother had to study. And so my father very easily took the decision, saying, I'm not going to work.
So your mom took that responsibility?
My mom went to work. My mom used to work at the bank, because my father was, my father said, and it was like a very open conversation, right? Where he said that my mom can't pick me up.
Right. Yeah.
It's impossible for her to pick me up. So even if my mom was there, my father needed to be there. So rather my father take that break.
So very logical, thinking.
Very logical, straightforward, no drama conversations.
Yeah, what is in the best interest of family to do, and that is how we go ahead.
Absolutely. And those days, like 90s, assuming that a man is not working, invited a lot of social stigma.
Totally.
But he said, I don't really care. What matters is our family right now, and this is what we take care. So
no, but that's very important, because even now the male breadwinner norm in India has not changed. You would know that men unemployment is very high in early 20s in India, among Indian men. But by the time they approach late 20s, unemployment among men in India disappears magically. Because as the marriage is also a norm in India. So around that time, whatever job you have to find only, and you do married, that, because you have to be earning before you can get married as a man, right? In India. So 30 years ago, doing that, defining social norm and going against the wisdom, that itself tells us like a big lesson in that. Yeah.
And that all is also endowment, right? We don't
that's an endowment. Having that
kind of people around.
Correct.
And luckily we had a large extended family, and everybody was close to each other, and almost all of us were living in Hyderabad. So we had a lot of family support. And for almost 4 months, I remember, Vidya, after that was where my father, I couldn't move anything, right? So my father would just sit and keep moving my fingers and my toes and my legs for almost 8 hours a day. So that just used to be the norm. Used to move, move, move. And after 4 months, I started, wriggling my toes, which was like a big win, because then that basically said, yeah, you could work for a lot of things, but you need to have a structured plan, right? And so gradually that started. So initially, like, I couldn't obviously sit or anything, so put a lot of pillows all around me to just make me come into that position. And they would count. Everyone, from my youngest cousins to my grandparents, would start counting 1, 2, 3 to see how long I sit. And then every 1 hour I had to repeat, and somebody or the other was always encouraging to make sure you keep doing that. So gradually I learned to sit, I learned to stand, and then I
all the skills you had to relearn.
Started relearning. Obviously, there's limited movement in my right hand because my upper limbs were the first affected. My left hand is still completely flaccid, and I have limited movement on my right hand. But
even now,
okay. But that actually taught me to adapt. So that's again another thing. I think I'll call it
endowment, adaptability.
About adaptability, right? Like everything, it was all about, nobody was doing it for me. Like even when I was studying and everything, right? My parents used to say, yeah, you got to do this, you got to do this. If you want to study for medicine, you got to work
adapt and
that 14, 15 hours a day. So there was no, pity or, some form of sympathy, saying, oh, let it be, or, somebody else compensating for your work. A lot of times in today's parenting, when I see, we compensate, try doing everything for the kids, right? And they were like, no, you got to figure out, right? Because at the end of the day, that's your life.
Correct.
So teaching adaptability, it was not easy, definitely not easy for them to see me struggle.
Right.
But they said, you got to do what you got to do.
Correct, so, because they wanted you to be independent eventually. So finally you have to do it. So it took 2 years or something for you to, how many years it took to stand again or walk?
Okay, stand was almost a year. And sitting was after about 8 months when I started going back to school. So my one deal was, I want to go back to school. So I used to be very, very
so you had some
socially active.
Your goal was that you want to go back.
I want to go back to school. When my toes started moving, that's when my first dream was, I want to go back to school. So then you need to sit. Then you need to, writing was far-fetched because by that time my hands were not moving at all. But at least if you're able to sit through in the class, then you can go back. So after about 8 months, I could sit with support. And that's when I said, I'll go back to school. And I was like a very, very active kid in school. I always used to top academics and sports. So when my parents approached the school, they said, yeah, you can get a bike. We'll figure out how we're going to make arrangements. And that's how I started going back to school. And my biggest win was my first exam that I wrote, I stood first. So for me, that was getting back to my normalcy. I couldn't write an exam, so I was using a writer. So it almost took me about a year and a half, 2 years, 2 years actually, to be able to write. Until then, I used to use a writer's help. But again, that goal thing, where it matters the most was, I could never explain constructions in maths to the writer. The writer was usually, a librarian or a language teacher. So how to make the constructions, I couldn't explain, and I would lose marks
because
for
of that.
So then it became a goal for me that I need to learn writing. So there were thousands and thousands of pages I think my father got, where I started writing every alphabet. I remember one full summer holidays, my 9th grade summer holidays, I was just sitting and writing for didn't do any other physiotherapy other than writing. Because my goal at that time was, okay, I want to be able to write on my own, because depending on someone else is actually.
So from the beginning, you were very high on, grit or determination. Willpower. Of course, that situation makes one, I suppose, even increase this.
Honestly, if you ask me, as
you
a
didn't
kid,
feel it that way.
Now, as a kid, I don't know.
Back,
But as a kid, I don't know. And to be very fair, I think a lot of that I attributed to my parents.
Right.
Because if the environment or the
Wasn't
ecosystem
supportive
didn't
enough.
support
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
I don't think I would have done any of
Yeah,
these.
right. So it's very important in general to have an environment. Some of us are, lucky enough to born into that environment, but otherwise it's very important to build a supportive environment
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
everyone. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because if your environment is not supportive, then I don't think you would move forward, right?
right.
Like it's very easy to give up.
Yeah.
I think the low periods was when the environment around me supported.
Correct.
And the overconfident times
Right.
was when the environment around me also
Yeah.
cut me down to,
Yeah. Right.
saying this is reality. So for instance, my deal with my dad was I will start going to school. Like his biggest worry was how would you do physiotherapy if you don't if you go off to school.
Yeah.
So my deal was I will go to school. After that I'll come and do for 4 hours. So there were days I would come back and say, oh, this is hurting, that is hurting, I'm very tired, and try avoiding physiotherapy because that was painful. And he stopped me sending me to school.
Oh, I see. You
he
have
said,
to, yeah.
It's a deal. So
Right,
you
right.
do it and then you go. So,
Right.
that kind of ecosystem, I think I'm very lucky to have that while growing up. Very lucky to have it even now, right? With the kind of person Harish is.
Yes.
Right? He will never let me settle down for something lesser.
Yeah,
lower,
suboptimal.
Suboptimal.
Just because,
my
yeah,
kids will keep pushing me for every possible
Right.
opportunity to do something better.
Right.
So I think, yeah,
Right.
that's again endowment, probably a later stage in life, but that's still endowment.
Yeah, true. The kids. So let us a little bit talk about the environment from the viewpoint of your current work. So you have this firm, right?
Aligned by design.
Aligned by design. So can you tell us a little bit more of that, and how do you see the clients you work with? Which are the environments in a company which are, say, supportive or enable people to thrive, and which are the kind of maybe leaders or the environment in the company which doesn't allow them to reach really to their potential?
So at Align by Design, basically we help companies today to actually go through transformations very seamlessly. A lot of companies collapse when they're trying to scale. Mergers and integrations when they happen, right? A lot of companies tend to fail at that time, or when companies are preparing for going for IPOs, etc. So we work with them to actually help them go through the transformation very seamlessly.
Right.
So our book, Hope is Not a Strategy, is all about every decision a leader needs to make is all a dilemma.
Right.
Right. And all dilemmas you have to deliberately choose. And the difficult part about a dilemma, or the beauty of a dilemma, is there's no right or wrong.
Right.
Everything has its pros and cons, right? So as a leader, you need to make those choices.
Right.
So we help leaders and leadership teams make those right choices to their context and what suits them. So for instance, nobody can say they can copy a Google's culture, or nobody can say that, oh, such and such a thing works in Amazon, so we want to do the same thing now. It has to be, in your context, suiting your requirement, right? So that's what we do with companies. So to your question of, which ones thrive when it comes to ecosystem and which ones don't, I think there are a lot of companies where there's a lot of transparency that is maintained, right?
Okay.
Which translates to role clarity,
Right.
clarity on strategy.
Right.
So there's no misalignment. Everybody knows what they're working towards. Everybody knows what is their role in the larger picture. Everyone knows what it means for each of them, right?
Right.
Places where that clarity is there, they always thrive. Places where that clarity is missing,
Right.
gives rise to a lot of politics, gives rise to a lot of unrest in the organization, all of which translates to lower productivity.
Right. So a transparency which leads to trust, I suppose, and then people know what they're supposed to do in their job, and there is complete clarity on the job roles and things like that. Kind of environment, if a leader, leadership creates, then people can give their best.
Absolutely.
I suppose. Yeah.
Because that alignment is key for people to
Feel part of
understand
it.
and feel part of that whole journey, and not feel like they're doing it for someone else, right? That sense of belongingness, and also helping them make the right decisions. Otherwise, what happens when that alignment is missing, all decisions keep flowing to the top.
Right.
So normally what we hear as problems that in organizations that, oh, people don't make decisions here.
Because there is no empowerment to make decisions.
Right.
Okay.
Empowerment and also giving the context.
Right.
Right. But empowerment without context also will make people make
Yes.
wrong decisions.
Right. Right.
And then the leader again starts doubting their people.
Yes.
So creating that environment where there is a lot of alignment and transparency and understanding is what makes organizations thrive. And that's what we help them do, because in all these change of context, like high scale journey or mergers, acquisitions, it's a lot of change that organizations go through, right? When they're getting ready for an IPO, right? A lot of transformations happen at that time. So bringing clarity at that time to ensure whatever journey they're in is successful is what we do.
Right. So you spoke a little bit about your book now. You mentioned hope is not a strategy, and it is along with your husband Harish.
Yes.
That brings me to the third E, which is where I think you met Harish, right, at a higher education level. So third E is education. So before we get to that story, in general, your school education, and then you went to one of the premier management schools, the premier management school in India, Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad. So maybe you can first of all tell us about that, if at all there was a struggle or the ambition, how you achieved, and then which part of how your experience was in terms of the support in the education system. I think school, you already said, was very supportive, but in general, maybe not specific institution where you studied, but in general, what is your experience about the education institutions in terms of support, and which part of your education you feel that even if you take out, you minus from your CV, it won't make much of a difference, or do you think all of it is valuable for different reasons?
Yeah. So school was where I studied from my low KG there, right?
Yeah.
So they all knew me.
Yeah.
So it was but obvious for them to be very supportive.
Right.
Because they knew the context,
Right.
right? And I was I was in my 8th grade, so it was just about 2 years.
So that's important. They knew the context. They had seen you as a normal thriving kid. And then the transformation. Correct. So they had the context.
So
right.
Because of the context, it was more accommodative.
Right.
And I'm deliberately using the word accommodative, and I'll come to that in a while. Then I went to a junior college for my 11th and 12th,
right,
because I was preparing for medical entrance. Right. At that point, when I had reached out to a lot of doctors and Medical Council of India, they said, because one hand is not working, you can still be a doctor, but you can be a physician. Right. You can't be a surgeon.
Right.
So, which was okay. So, for me, it was like rewiring my dream from fellow of Royal College of Surgeons to, Royal College of Physicians. Yeah. So, I was okay with that. And then came the point where I wrote my entrance. I got a very good rank. Okay. In my first attempt itself. And then they said, I went for my interview. I joined the medical college actually. And then we have medical examinations. So after you join the college, you have medical examination in the first week itself.
I see.
During medical examination, they said, sorry, your admission is cancelled. And because Medical Council of India that year came up with a rule that first year surgery was compulsory.
Oh.
Which was it was a big shock for me. And for me, that was the lowest point probably, because that was what I was dreaming for. Yeah. And everything from recovery, my goal was that, right? My goal was getting closer to that, and I was dreaming for it. And so I was super excited when I got through. I thought, okay, in spite of all of this, I made it. Right. And then they said, your admission is cancelled. And this was almost like a couple of months into the academic year. I didn't have any other option at that point. And there was no point me saying that I'll write it again next year. There was no point going to the court because none of this was going to get resolved.
They had this new rule, right?
And it is a regulation. They have
regulation. Unless they change the regulation, otherwise one has to fight, which is
correct. And to what extent? If the rule is passed and there's a reason why they've passed it, then to what extent? Yeah. And I didn't have an option. So that was the year Bachelor of Computer Applications, BCA, was being introduced in Hyderabad.
Okay.
And because it's a new course, obviously there were not too many takers and all. around December I joined, because after I lost the admission, I was completely distraught.
Shattered.
I thought, that's the end. I don't have anything else to do.
Right.
My parents were telling me to write civil services and all of that, but I said, I'm not interested, and all of that. So Bachelor of Computer Applications started that year. That it seemed very interesting, and again, probably the curiosity from childhood. I thought, okay, maybe let me give that a try. And you won't believe, I joined a college, and the head of the department first said, with one hand, how will you type? And it didn't strike to me until then. That to type, and those were not the days of laptop, right? So type on a keyboard. She said, how will you type on the keyboard with a single hand? And she said, okay, go give it a try. I sat in the lab and I could barely type anything. I was looking for one letter after another and trying to type. She said, you have practical exams in March. So how are you going to do it? So again, there it was like, probably in hindsight, I think it could have been told to me better.
Okay.
But for me, it became like, oh, this option is also closed. But then I thought, okay, anyway, I've joined, so let me give it a try. So I studied, and I joined a class to actually teach me typing.
Okay.
So there was this teacher who was teaching programming, and those are not the days when you had PCs at home.
Right.
So I had to go to that lab, because he would teach programming and he would leave you in the lab for as long as you want. So then I could sit and practice there. And then my parents saw that, and then they got me a computer home. And I would practice day and night and learn typing with a single hand. But what I think what that did to me was, this is not okay. You should not tell that you can't do something, because then the world outside will judge you. So that's when I became very, very close to myself. As in, I would never tell people. And by then I had lost a lot of weight, and also people couldn't make out that I had a problem. So I realized, because the moment I went and told them, she said, you can't do it. I said, no, the world doesn't accept you like this.
Right.
So that was my own,
way of rewiring.
That, okay, as long as you don't tell people anything, you're okay.
People will think everything is normal, and then they won't discriminate.
And whatever fight you have to put, you put it in the background, but don't tell it to people. That was what it started with. Then I was studying. Then after my undergrad, I wrote CAT, and so I was very clear that I will not get a disability certificate or anything.
So
like
you got through the CAT on a normal merit.
Yeah, I got through all the IIMs. Then when
if you went to IIM Ahmedabad, of course you would have got through all other IIMs.
So then I got through all of them. Then I said, I'll go to Ahmedabad. But by then my mental wiring was, you do not tell things to people.
Yeah, I will not disclose that
anything.
I have a disability.
Yes, and you do not. You don't have two close friends. Because when they become very close to you, they'll know about you. So you don't have too big of a friend circle. You speak to people, but you don't have two close friends. So, there was this very strong guard that I built around myself, where I would never let people in.
No, but before we get to there, but it's a big lesson for everyone, not using because people end up using entitlement even when they need not, right? But you took a conscious decision that you will not use the entitlement of disability certificate, and you will get through the merit.
Correct.
To IIM Ahmedabad.
Because there was no problem with my thinking. See, my brain was working well, right?
Yeah,
my brain was working. Whatever was with my body.
Right.
And that didn't stop me from, by then I could write really fast. So that didn't stop me from thinking or working hard, right? So I didn't have a reason to take it. Right. So, it was not like I would take a privilege or anything.
So it also shows you did not want anyone to show you pity or sympathy or something for disability.
Right. And in fact, that I think again credit goes to my parents, because there was no such environment at home. If I had to do something, I had to do it. So for instance, because later my father started going to work again, and after I started my undergrad, my mom was working. So if food needed to be made in the house, I had to learn to cook.
Right.
Because that's what was being independent, right?
So at IIM Ahmedabad, since there was no context to them, right, similar to your undergraduate college, it must have been difficult, since you did not make close friends deliberate choice of not making that, and I suppose it's difficult to be accommodative for them since they have no context. How did you deal?
Yeah. So from an academic standpoint,
There was
having
no issue.
context, no context didn't matter, right?
Right.
So teachers wise, it didn't matter to me. But IIM Ahmedabad was the first time I was going and living in a hostel. So
Oh, I
that
see.
brought a
Right.
whole lot
Lot
of
of
dynamics,
challenges.
which again I didn't think through earlier.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
You had to wash your clothes, you had to go pick food and
Hmm.
eat, and you have to
Even climb up, climb
climb
down, and
up,
all
climb
this.
down. And IIM Ahmedabad at that point was not an accessible campus.
Hmm.
So everywhere you had to climb,
Hmm.
and I had difficulty in climbing stairs. So then it was like I would restrict to the extent that I can
Hmm.
restrict. So there were classes. Luckily, the classes
On the ground
were on the
floor.
ground floor, and but all the other things, you had like guest
Hmm.
lectures and everything used to happen in places where you had to climb flight of stairs. The most difficult part was, going to the first floor to actually put your clothes into laundry, drying
Right.
your clothes and folding them and keeping them back again. Again, those are all life skills that probably that place taught me, but it became very overwhelming
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
Because there was already a lot to do in terms
Right.
of
Right.
studying
Yes.
and academic rigor,
Yeah.
and there was so much that I had to manage with my own
Hmm.
life, and so it
Totally.
became a juggle.
Hmm.
And it took me time to get there. I made good friends, but I never let anyone
Come
in
very close.
come very close to me. In fact, after 20 years now, when I keep connecting with people, that is when they started knowing about me. So until about 2020, nobody really knew, nobody, including my work colleagues, my batchmates, knew that I had a problem.
Oh.
I was like master of camouflage. I was like, I could give myself that title. So, not letting anybody know that you have a problem.
Right, and we will talk about that more. How you are trying to talk more about this, but going back to education. Did you think being in Ahmedabad, which is like an elite institution, uh, opened up any opportunities for you in terms of networking, or later in life, alumni network or anything? What is the biggest you think a positive of formal education in India? Because it's not very clear that we make people job ready or something, right? In being in, it is many times is just a signal. One gets a certification from a certain institute and they have already selected students who are very good, right? So what is the biggest positive you think for you it was from IIM Ahmedabad?
The rigor. I
Hmm.
think the rigor, what it did to me and what it opened up outside, I'll separate the two.
Yeah.
What it did to me was the rigor of studying, and because it had the case based
Right, case
form of
based approach.
education, right? The ambiguity, getting exposed to ambiguity, uncertainty, and dealing where you have to make these choices. While later
Right.
in life, we're working on the dilemmas framework and other stuff,
Right.
dealing with uncertainties, and the quantum of work that we did there
Hmm.
actually made everyone there believe that they can go and handle anything in life.
Okay. Hmm.
So that
So it
rigor personally
prepared
made
you for
less.
the world outside, which is uncertain and
Yeah,
unpredictable.
unpredictable, and also where initially, your initial jobs are a
Hmm.
lot of grunt
Right.
work,
Right.
right? Preparing one for dealing with all of that
Hmm.
and working hard towards it. And the other thing that it did, because we had the case based form of education, was interdisciplinary learning, right?
Right.
You don't treat HR as HR only,
Yeah.
you don't treat operations as
Hmm.
operations, you don't treat strategy
Hmm.
separately. Everything comes together when you look through a
Right.
case, right?
Right.
So that also help form that holistic thinking, because until then I was only used to reading a subject and reproducing
Right.
that in the exam,
Right.
right? So that's what
Okay.
Ahmedabad did to me. In terms of opening doors, I think it opens a lot of opportunities just with the tag, because I think people also know that you've gone through that rigor. There are certain given
Right.
aspects, when you look at entire, across batches or profiles of all people, there's a minimum common denominator which says they will work hard.
Right.
So that's what I think is the trust that it builds when we look out for opportunities. I missed one part of your earlier question about which part of my education I would take out. I wouldn't take out anything, because my undergrad, my school it gave me,
Right.
everything back again. My undergrad was where I figured that nothing is impossible, right? It
Right.
again reinforced for me
Right.
that she said I can't figure out typing and give exams in 4 months.
Yeah.
Actually wrote the exams and I was the first in the university. So big
Wonderful,
joke then
so
was there was one in our college there was one person who failed and one person who got first in the university. Everybody assumed I was the one who failed till the result actually
it
came
came.
to us.
Yes.
So that actually reinforced my belief in myself.
Right.
So I would never take that part of my
Right.
education out,
Yeah.
and that also taught me a lot of programming and exposure to technical side of life, which otherwise, again, right, being a
Right.
biology student, I would never have
Right.
learned that. IIM Ahmedabad, obviously, I will never take that away. And even later, 10 years later, 2015, I got the Fulbright Scholarship. So, Government of India gives 14 people every year to go and do a fellowship in leadership and management at Carnegie Mellon.
Okay.
I got that in 2015. So, I went to do my
Super.
fellowship there.
Okay.
And that again, because that was that, little more maturity in life.
Right.
And having seen the corporate world, there it was a complete form of unlearning, relearning, because we studied through a lot, worked with a lot of industries there, but it was learning without actually having that pressure of
Right.
academics or
Right.
marks, but actually looking at what do you take away from, the organizations around you, what do you actually take away from your lectures and bring things back. In fact, this whole dilemma resolution framework that we speak about in the book Hope is Not a Strategy originated during the fellowship time.
And tell us a little bit about why the name Hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, because no organization, can work purely on hope. You can't wing it, right? You have to make certain deliberate choices and decisions. Assuming as you go along the way, things will happen is not
a
going to
strategy.
work.
Yeah.
Right. So hope cannot be strategy
Right.
alone.
Right.
It's hope. In this context, hope is not about not having optimism.
Yes.
It is about you can't assume that ho jayega.
Right.
Right. That never happens.
Right. Right. You have to take some conscious
decisions and deliberately make your choices.
Correct.
In life for an individual and for a corporate for running of that organization.
Right. There are trade-offs everywhere, as we in economics say, but we have to weigh those trade-offs, cost and benefit, and decide in that context what is the best decision. So we have talked about endowment, environment, education. So fourth is effort, and you have talked. You have explained to us what you went through and your own effort to to overcome all the adversity and get to where you are now. You also talked about effort of your parents, right? But the effort which equal effort is required by your spouse and now your children, I suppose, right, to support you. So how important do you think is a role of supportive spouse in general? Anyway, it is very important, but especially with for you.
I think basically everyone has a drive. You have a drive, you have a goal, everyone keeps working towards it. There are times when you feel lost, there are times when you feel lonely, there are times when you feel like giving up. Those are the times when your support system just pushes you up a little.
Right.
You actually get better. The other place where it always helps me is complacency.
Right.
There are also times when you get into that comfort zone.
Right.
Everything is working. Why do you want to change something, disturb something? And that's when the ecosystem around you nudges you, saying, "Why are you settling down for something? You can do a lot more."
Right.
I think these are two places where my support system makes a huge difference in my life today.
Right. Wonderful. So you also work together, Harish and you. Of course, I see there is a lot of positive since you continue to work together. How do you maintain the balance, as a partner in terms of business and partner in terms of lives? Do you separate the two worlds, or what happens?
Oh, so we have a fundamental rule that we do issue-based arguments.
Okay.
So when we are talking about a particular thing, if we are disagreeing on something, that is disagreement on that. It doesn't spread to other things in life. The next minute we're talking about a different thing, we are back to normal. Second, we clearly separate work and
Personal
personal
life.
stuff, where again it's a lot of role clarity for us. Even in personal life, we know what role each of us play in different things. At work, we have very different roles that we play, and we're very brutal when it comes to giving honest, candid feedback. Then, but that doesn't rub off onto the personal side of it. So we keep saying issue-based arguments. So that's our
Yeah,
mantra
excellent
that's working.
framework to have, especially with close people. I
Yeah.
think if you are working together,
Yeah.
family or friends, just issue-based
Yeah.
arguments, right?
So we fight on something. Next minute, we're talking about a different thing.
Right,
It's you start from ground zero.
right, right.
It's
Correct.
like that memory of a goldfish kind of a thing. You don't carry that too
Right,
much.
yes,
Yeah.
excellent. So the last is then the equality of opportunity, and I know in this specific area you want to do a lot more, given your own experiences in the past. So where do you see India currently? Has means we know now in many education institutions, it is now many public places now it is mandatory. To have certain facilities so that people with disability do not feel excluded. But where do we stand currently? You feel, and what should be the conversations that we need to have? Much more often.
So I'll give you a little context of where this is stemmed
Yes.
from, right? From 2021, I started speaking more, especially during COVID time.
What
for the
made
first
you
time.
speak more? Because you had taken a conscious decision, not to speak and hide your disability, right?
Yeah.
What happened that you realized that one should speak more?
So 2020 was a very difficult time, COVID time
Yeah.
for everyone, right?
Right.
And we had lost friends, we had lost people we knew very closely, and you see that everywhere around there was a lot of distress. So at that time, someone encouraged me to actually write. Maybe it'll give a ray of hope to someone somewhere.
Okay.
And for the first time, so there was this article on me that got published in Telangana Today.
Okay.
About rewiring, saying that we're going through a phase of rewiring, but rewiring is, for a lot of people, rewiring always is a norm.
Right.
So we should also look at this phase like that. So it started like that. I got fantastic, kind of feedback, responses from people saying, oh, this is good, this was inspiring. So at that point, for me, it was just at an inspiration level, and I kind of kept quiet after that. Then 22, 23, I started talking. Again, somebody said, oh, we read that article, and some people said this was very nice. So I said, can you come and speak here? So occasionally I would speak, but I was never comfortable speaking because somewhere in my head, still speaking was accepting. And I was still camouflaging big time, not letting anybody know, right? 2020, when the article got published, my batchmates, my friends,
they approached you thinking that they never knew this.
How come we lived with you
and
for 2 years and we didn't know anything about this? So, and my workplace colleagues did not know. So when the article got published, next day I was talking to a few of them. They said, we didn't even have a clue that you were going through so much. So that was going on. And then suddenly somebody had written to me saying, you don't know me, but I know you. And I was going through such a bad time. I was on the verge of committing suicide. My aunt showed me your letter, your article. And I read that. I thought I'll give myself one more chance. And today I'm happily married. I'm going to have a kid in a few months. And if it's a girl, I'll name her Sirisha. This is what this person writes to me. And it actually shook me up, saying, okay, if you can impact, then why not talk? So I started talking a little more from that, saying, okay, if it can help someone somewhere, maybe that's a good thing to do. And then slowly as I was speaking, I realized that in India, we glorify suffering. Right. Okay. It's a very sad part, right? Anybody suffering will say it's inspiring. But suffering has two parts to it. One is what the person goes through, which nobody can trade off, nobody can change anything. The other is what the ecosystem is doing. And that's when I realized, had my ecosystem been more open, probably I would have... society. At home you had a very good ecosystem, but outside home environment, the ecosystem was lacking. Absolutely, right? And if your teachers were more open, if everything was more open and people were more accommodating and not judging, maybe I wouldn't have carried so much baggage. Because for me it was like every day from morning wearing a garb, wearing a facade that you very closely protect till the time you come back home. That's a lot of effort, right? That's a lot of mental turmoil. So I was like, oh, why are we glorifying not having accessible places? Oh, you struggled so much on campus because you had to climb all of these. Why are we glorifying that? That is not something that needs to be glorified. That needs to be solved for.
Right.
Because that's what we can do as an ecosystem, as a society.
And that it should be just a norm that these things should be there.
Absolutely, right? Because again, whatever people are born with, whatever people go through, it's what happens to them.
Right.
But why do you want to exclude?
Yeah.
The other aspect to that is, India statistically, in a few years from now, we'll be where Japan is, right? Where you'll have a much higher older population, right? And our medical science is advancing so much, medical science won't let us die.
Right.
Right? So we're all going to live, our generation especially will live for, well into their 90s.
Yes.
Right? And we don't have a universal basic income. We as a country cannot afford a universal basic income. Which means you need these people out there, or if you include the spectrum of physical disabilities, majority are unrecorded in India. Physical disabilities, you include neurodivergent spectrum, it's a huge disability spectrum. Then and physical, I'm including your visual, your auditory, everything, and the
elderly,
and you include the elderly. That is going to be 29% of our population in another 10 years from now.
Wow.
29% of our population, if you are letting them locked inside houses because you don't have accessible spaces or accessible ecosystem, then it's a disaster waiting. Right? Because the moment that inequality comes, the whole society is going to break down, right? If you have 29% of people who are dependent.
Right.
So my view of the initiative that I'm working on, I'm just about to launch, is Samawishi Bharat. It's about creating an inclusive India where it's equal opportunity for everybody, irrespective of whatever are their disabilities. And older population, you also make sure they come back to workforce, because how will people sustain till 90s when they don't have pensionable jobs? Right. People have to keep working.
That is one thing. Like they can come back to the labor force and work, but otherwise also, even if they don't need to, there should be simply access for them to come out in open. Absolutely. And be like walking around or wherever they want to go, because if they're healthy, then they should be able to move around
and mingle with people, because we are social animals at the end of the day. By 2047, I want India to be the most accessible place. Multiple reasons. 30% of the population, if the 30% of the population,
India's 30% of population is like huge millions.
Is huge, right?
Yeah.
And if they are going to be marginalized, if they're not going to come into mainstream, we have a huge problem to solve, because we will not be able to have the working population take care of that entire population. And that divide will actually is what is going to make crime and everything rise. And that's what history has shown us.
Correct.
Right? So if for this 30% of the population, Samawishi Bharat will actually make the country very accessible. Now, there are different pillars in Samawishi Bharat. One is awareness. In India, we lack awareness completely. We don't understand, what a disability is. We pass judgments. In fact, people don't even know how to talk to someone with a disability. Right. There are those awkward pauses, awkward silences, change of topics that happen when somebody says they have a problem.
People are not sure whether to show sympathy, pity, or behave like a normal. So people just are not aware what to do.
Absolutely, right? Like, strobe lights coming from the laptops are very difficult for autistic kids. Okay, so digital accessibility is something we need to work on. Right. And, people on the ADHD spectrum, right? They have a lot of challenges that they go through, and mainstream has to accommodate for all those challenges. Physical disability, you look for any place in India, and I have actually gone through cities to look for these places. You look for any place in India, you will not find ramps that are continuous. You will not find ramps
Right.
that people can walk through. You will not find footpaths that are not 1.5 foot high. That
Right,
is
right.
impossible
Correct.
for older people to
Yeah.
climb. And it's a joke when I see early morning, I see 1.5 high foot footpath is there, but all the older people are walking on the roads
yeah.
because they find it difficult to
Correct,
climb. And
And there are no continuous either in
no
India.
continuous
footpaths.
thing,
It's-
right?
Yes.
And everything is dug. So
Correct,
visual
dug.
accessibility, after a point, you don't have your
Correct,
visual
totally.
cues that are
Yes.
there on the tactile
Right,
feedback
yeah.
markers on the footpath. And for auditory, we are not prepared. So there are whole and upper body disability, and because I go through that, I see that for a lot of places, accessibility is equal to ramp is equal to wheelchair.
Right.
Okay, and they say the place is accessible.
Yeah.
Sorry, it is not. If your lift buttons are very high,
Yeah.
it's tough for someone to operate
Correct,
them.
correct.
So better.
So
be
attention
aware.
to detail is very, very important at every
Very
stage,
important.
rather than doing something just then the like CSR. Like I have made it just do some basic thing and say that it is accessible. It's not
Absolutely.
acceptable.
Absolutely, right? And it needs design thinking. So I'm a design thinking practitioner from Stanford.
Right.
So this requires design thinking. This requires
Totally.
to think from first principles to see what is okay.
Right.
And you need to make people more aware. Right. And second is action for this awareness. Right. The second pillar is all about mandating that offices and all your public places, your societies have to be accessible.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether somebody is there. It's so much of accommodation that people do for you
Right.
when it makes you feel very different.
Correct.
I'll tell you one very
So by design, they are it ensures as if you know that you are different, and that is not at all needed.
That
Like
is
you
not
have to,
required.
Yeah, that is not required. Correct.
right. And why differentiate? It's equal right, equal authority, and you have to provide it irrespective of whether a person is there or not. I'll tell you 2-3 such incidents that happened. There was one award ceremony, and I was getting an award for something which had a huge flight of stairs. I said, I won't go up and take it. Said, no, you sit in a chair, we'll pick you up. I said, no, I'm not okay with any of you picking me up. Why should you pick me up? If you wanted me up there, you could have made sure you're accommodated.
Correct.
Okay, there's another place where I was getting an award. Obviously, the organizers were very empathetic upfront. So they made sure they made the place accessible, the stage accessible, and all of that. The next year, the same event, I wasn't an award recipient. I went for the event and they didn't have anything. Okay,
So only
that
for
also
that
is
one-
not okay because this is tokenism.
Right.
Right? And you cannot build a society based on that. What if somebody who were in the awardees had a fall and was coming there on a wheelchair?
Right.
What would you have done then?
Right.
So this has to become a norm.
Right.
Likewise, even in buildings, accessibility. Sometimes they just put one plyboard and they say that, yeah, this is accessible.
accessible.
Instead of the steps, you can use this.
Right.
It's like, no, why?
Yeah.
Right? And the more I started voicing it out, I'm realizing that there's so many such gaps. In fact, anywhere on the street you go out, right? No shop is accessible.
Right.
So this is a way of marginalizing it. I'll tell you another.
So maybe marginalizing sometimes maybe even without realizing, right? Even without intention, maybe.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Like
And
people
that is why I'm
simply
giving benefit
not
of doubt.
aware because they are
Correct.
not simply aware or they don't simply think from that angle. They perhaps don't even realize that this is happening.
Absolutely. That's why I'm saying I'm giving that benefit of doubt and saying that awareness is the most
Yeah,
important.
awareness is.
But after awareness, that action and enforcing that action is equally very important. People say, oh, this is an old building, this is an old structure, we can't do anything. But you got to figure out because you have much more older places outside
India
where
where there is
people have made it accessible.
Right.
Right. So it's more about the intent then.
Does
right?
India have any policy like a goal like how we have for sustainability or carbon elimination? Do we have any goals towards normalizing?
So there is this about giving equal accessibility and also to a certain extent of newer places having the ramps and everything, but that is very minimal understanding of it and it is not enforced completely. Right, because there's nobody who is questioning about it.
Correct.
I'll tell you one very interesting anecdote before I go to the third pillar. So I spoke about awareness and action, right? I was in a board meeting And there's a very senior board member. She's like very well known. And the CEO often talks about diversity, equity, inclusion. And they're one of our clients for the consulting work that we do. And I was in their board meeting. And the senior lady says, they said, we are not meeting our DEI norms. For the top 2 layers of leadership, we don't have a woman. So she said, hey, DEI matlab, you just have to do 30% women, no. Get at the entry level. By the time they get married, we can let them go. We'll keep filling at the entry level. So that's what, like, I was completely shocked hearing that statement coming from a woman. Forget about, disability, right? Coming from a woman who's actually talking about, get it at the entry level and we'll be done with that percentage. Right? So there's no respect for some of these things that we're talking about, which is the third pillar, which is about corporate index, creating a corporate index for how many corporates are accessible, not accessible, and they're open, they're actually hiring people with differently able people. And it's very easy, and I've done this in organizations where there are certain roles that don't need people to move. There are certain roles that need voice command, right? Where it is not about, visually impaired people are great at doing CRM. Right? Customer relationship management, all your, calls and everything, they can handle it if you train them well. So you figure which are the roles and figure what you need for those roles. And
are there any organizations which stand out for you currently?
No. No. None that do it very deliberately. Lemon Tree does. Lemon Tree takes people with neurodivergence, people with Down syndrome and all for their support work. But apart from Lemon Tree, I've not seen many places. There's this chain of restaurants called Ishara, which are affiliated to Phoenix. So in all the Phoenix malls, you find Ishara, which is basically a restaurant that is run by deaf and dumb people. And where they come and, that's why it's called Ishara, because Ishara in Hindi is action, right? So what you want to order, every item on the menu card has a symbol that you show to them. To help them understand that. And there's this entire Mitti group which has cafes in all popular airports, where which are completely run by differently able people. But these are very specific organizations.
And maybe it need not always be like completely run. It is more important to be
integrated.
Integrated, into the...
That inclusion is missing, right? And that's why that corporate index to actually say which are not, meeting the norms. And it's like your taxation, right? If somebody doesn't meet the norms, they don't get through. And that is where the fourth pillar, which is a public policy, becomes so much more important, because reinforcement at the end of the day has to work from the government side, lawmakers, right? And for that, we're looking at having a something like an index. Every city you rate to actually say what is their accessibility index, etc. And the fifth major pillar is, I've been speaking to a lot of NGOs and people who work with CSR funds, etc. And I realized that all effort is fragmented, right? And I don't want Samawishi Bharat to run like a fragmented effort. I don't want it to run like a social arm where, somebody feels like giving 2 hours of their time, they would give it. This is an important national issue that we need to handle. Which is why I want it to be a for-profit organization. And the whole way of running it, like all of these in terms of certifying organizations for their accessibility, doing assessment of your cities, driving awareness, while some of these could be funded by your CSR funds, large part of it is also creating that Samawishi Bharat fund, which is going to, fund a lot of these, support accessories for people with disabilities. So if you see, there are a lot of people who make, different wheelchairs which are helping people go on the road. The typical wheelchairs don't move on Indian roads, right? So there are people who make those different wheelchairs. There are people who are making some auditory devices. But these are NGOs, and they are working with CSR funds, so they get disbursed to a few people. So they're working in pockets. So that fund becomes the platform where all
fund these kind of innovations.
To fund these kind of innovations which are required for the future. Now, if you look at the spectrum I'm talking about, there are a whole lot of innovations. And, not having all of those in India means it's an opportunity, right, for innovation to happen. So basically fund those things. So it becomes a platform or a marketplace of sorts for people to buy and more innovations to come, and impact investors to actually invest into these products so that they're available large scale.
Right.
And because they don't have the volume today, they're at a very expensive price.
Correct. To
And
scale it up,
to scale it,
only
you
if
need
scales
this.
it
And
up,
you
then
also
the
have a lot
cost
of
will.
government funds that can come
Right.
to actually support innovations like this. So, for instance, if you look at the possibilities today, right, with AI and exoskeletons, you can actually make arms move.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
You can
Yes,
have
yes.
an external nervous system kind of a thing that moves your arm
Yes.
based on instructions, and that is already being done.
Yes.
It's about making it accessible. You have
Correct.
exoskeletons to help older people to stabilize and walk
Hmm.
properly.
So, but however, its healthcare system, in general, makes it accessible and reduces the cost.
Is the
will
most
that
important thing.
Right.
And that is where creating that platform and the marketplace. So it's a grand vision, and it's not going to be mine alone. It has to be a movement, is what
Indeed,
I talk
totally.
about it. It's a movement of people coming together to work on this, to make this happen. And nothing works if it is run out of charity.
Yeah,
So
totally.
it has to be a
Yes.
profitable organization.
Right.
So, you want that fund to be managed. You need the best fund manager to actually manage that fund, to know where to deploy.
Correct.
And
Yeah,
where
because
not
that
to.
itself is a
It's a huge
skill that you to figure out which innovations to fund, and which ones
which
yeah,
ones
we
to
can fund
combine
later
with
on.
something else and
Correct.
do it, etc.
Correct. Superb means, even though you said it's a grand vision, true to your book, there is a strategy.
There's a plan. Yes.
It's just not like a vision and a hope that
It'll
this
happen
will
one
happen.
day. Yes.
You have a very concrete strategy, and 5 pillars, so very well thought out. And I just hope you talk more and more about it. Of course, we'll discuss as well as we go ahead more about this. So it has been wonderful, Sirisha, to talk about this with you. I normally end the conversation with 2 questions. I think the first question, perhaps your answer will be like nothing, but nonetheless, because so much you have already done. Like, if you had to relive your 20s, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I would have spoken about this earlier.
Okay.
And that's something that I think that had I spoken earlier, maybe the change could
You would
have
have much
happened
more
earlier.
time by
The
now
change
to
could have
happened
much
earlier. So
Somebody
that's an
has to
important
start.
lesson. That has to important lesson.
Yeah.
Like for us in general to be open and to talk about disability or anything, so more people get
And
helped.
not just disability, right? Anything, somebody has to start
Yes,
raising your voice.
any moment, someone has to start.
So,
If we feel strongly about something, we have to start that, and not just hope that one day someone else will do it. Totally.
Because
And
20 years wouldn't have been so stressful.
correct.
Had I done this earlier.
Correct. Means I can't even imagine to having that facade and having to carry that for so many years. It's just like too tough. But now the last question to the current youth in their 20s, especially those who could not go to elite educational institutions, because as you said, Ahmedabad opened a lot of doors for you. Suppose they cannot go to an elite institution, or do not have as much endowment and support as you had in terms of your parents and so on. What should they be doing? What should they focus most?
In my view, getting your hands dirty. I think it's not just for people in 20s. Even those of us in our 40s today probably need to get our hands dirty, be more adaptable and agile. I think in the current age, 2 skills that are needed are learning agility and learnability, right? Your ability to learn something,
right.
and the pace at which you learn something. I think those are the only 2 things that will let anyone survive. And I think getting your hands dirty early on, and that really doesn't depend on the educational institution you're coming from, right? Working on as many things as possible, because in my view, with the rate at which the technology evolution is happening, very soon we'll lose the traditional jobs.
Right.
Okay, either it's going to be interdisciplinary or it is going to be deep specialists. So there was a period when the world around us encouraged generalists, right? The manager population, right?
Yes.
You will not have that any longer. So you'll need deep specialization. So that deep specialization, there's nothing different which an elite institution will teach versus a local college will teach. The concepts remain the same. It's about how deep you go, how hard, how much you do hands-on to actually learn deeper about a topic, I think that'll.
So I have a slightly different opinion on this last part, but we'll discuss that at some other time. Specialist versus the generalist. But Sirisha, it has been a wonderful talking to you. Very very inspirational, and thanks for coming and giving your time to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking about it. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.